Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about and draw parallels between running a country and running a business. Now, there's obviously many differences, but talking about the commitment and the intent of the people. Now, in a business situation that I was in, there was another group, another business that had kind of been subcontracted to do something in a excuse me, a wider project, and I think they were the only people who'd sort of put their hands up to do it. So right at the last minute, some other people that we were doing business with took them in and said, "Okay, you guys can have that part of the project." Now, ordinarily, they may not have got it, but they weren't what you would call very well qualified. I'd go as far to say that they were inept, if not incompetent. And the people involved just hadn't been trained enough. They were quite, or educated enough. They were quite unsophisticated in their understanding some of the basics involved. And within a very tight, small nucleus, they had some expertise. But outside of that, they were embarrassingly unqualified. Nonetheless, they were there and they were signed up, and that was it. So part of the work that we were doing was to do business with them. So we'll work alongside them at least. And but one of the things that struck me was how inept they were, and they certainly were. That they were very committed to. They were very loyally committed and focused on achieving a positive outcome. When I say positive outcome, I'm talking about, in a very practical, fact-based, independent assessment. They were committed to achieving a level of success and were quite tightly committed to that. They were very loyal to that cause. And were to be admired for that. Now, whether they went about it the wrong way, whether they were inadvertently self-destructive in how they went about it, we can discuss that. But their commitment was unquestioned, and their loyalty to it was unquestioned. Now, I draw a parallel here with government, and if we look back what something that the globalist cheer squad crow about now is that Western parliaments have never had such a well-educated political class. All the nearly all the representatives in parliaments today, the Senate has a representatives, and where nearly all of them have an unusually high level of education compared to, say, 50 years ago. Now, there are more people running around with degrees now than there were then. But bear in mind that there are, 80% or something of all kids at college are studying some sort of bullshit sociology or related course, or that has a heavy sociology component in it, which allows them to pass on the sociology side, even though they've flunked the main game. So there's that. So they're saying we've never had such a well-educated workforce, a well-educated political class. Now, if that is the case, then we also have never had a political class that has been less loyal and less committed to the people they're supposed to serve. So there's that, and I think that's the bigger issue. Now, 50 years ago, you might find people that had left school at 15 years old and gone to work, in the factory or on the railways or that sort of thing. But almost universally across these entire parliaments and bodies politic, these people were very committed to making the lives of their fellow citizens better, and to work very hard towards that goal. Now, it didn't mean they were always right. It didn't mean they never made mistakes. It didn't mean that they bumbled and fumbled as they tried to do these things. All that happened, but that they were very committed to that aim of improving the lives of their fellow citizens is is without doubt. It's unquestioned in the Western world. Now, unlike the Banana Republic type countries or the communist countries, or whatever, their living standards, if they improved at all, which was very patchy to say the least, if they even improved at all, it was at great expense elsewhere in their lives. Their curtailment of freedoms of association and lower quality consumer goods and that sort of thing. So so if you look at the difference between, say, now East Germany is a case in point in the communist bloc, the East European Soviet communist bloc. East Germany was the most efficient, most effective, the shining example of the success of communism amongst all the communist societies, and yet their standard of living was, excuse me, I had a big glass of orange juice and went down the wrong way, but. So even though they were the shining example, they still had a standard of living somewhere around one sixth of that of West Germany. This was before the reunion of Germany in the early 1990s. So that gives you an indication of how different the two societies were, and how much that chasm of difference between. Now, the East Germans, not that they weren't industrious and everything, they were, but they were pursuing ideological goals. And so in the damage that causes, the wider collateral damage when ideological goals are pursued was made evident there. Like, it's not just they had half as much standard of living, 1/6 is the so that's a fucking chasm. So coming back to these people in the business situation I was in, their commitment was unquestioned, and they weren't pursuing any ideological goals. They maybe had a couple of ideas. Nor was it my business to lecture them on what they should or shouldn't do, or maybe a couple of alternative ways of doing things I suggested, but it would have taken quite a lot of persuading, and I wasn't prepared to put that amount of time in, nor do I think they would have necessarily received it well. The trouble when you get underqualified people and who realize deep down, they realize they're not qualified to do the role, and they're automatically defensive and even slightly pugnacious, and the insecurity of knowing they're surrounded by better qualified people makes them that way, which is why there's a huge array of petty crimes you can commit in business situations or any situation, societal situation anywhere in the West now, because of the massive forced influx of black and brown people into the West. There has to be this array of sort of petty crimes because the people being brought in are quite insecure. They're surrounded by better educated, better qualified, in the main, people, and so the folks arriving, these migrants that are being forced on us in the West, they've got all these petty insecurities and their chip on the shoulder. The Indians in particular, but others as well, and so the Arabs to maybe a slightly lesser extent, but still up there. Then they have no recourse. They can either improve themselves and fit in, which they don't want to do. Or they can accuse all the white people of being bad and evil and Nazis, which is very easy to do. And even our government helps them and funds them with all sorts of means. Our state security apparatus even goes to help them, saying, we'll run around and arrest white people for you if they upset you. I mean, goodness me, has it come to this? Yes, it has. But coming back to these people, so the politicians of 50 years ago, they were very committed to their fellow citizens. And if you look at the standard of living increase in standard of living that was achieved, during that time of nationalist commitment to your own citizenry, the Western world, the wealth of the Western world and the wealth of Western citizens, the standard of living of Western citizens, grew quite considerably during that time. Well, for whatever the faults of the politicians may have had, they were dedicated and focused, and there's always some exceptions, dedicated and focused on improving the lives of the citizenry. And that shows up in the results that they achieved. Now, from the very moment they decided that they no longer, the globalists took over in effect, or began the process of taking over. From the moment they decided they no longer represent the citizenry, or their commitment was not to improve the lives of their fellow citizens, then things went downhill from there, and you can sort of see it. So it gave me a little window into seeing that people who weren't really that smart, who weren't really fully qualified or even well qualified, and who were largely inept, because they were so committed to getting the job done and so committed to succeeding on a fact-based, impartial assessment of it, that they still ended up, falling over the line, and in spite of all the inadequacies, that they ended up falling over the line. Whereas far better qualified outfits, or theoretically far better qualified, were so hung up on pursuing a ideological agenda. For example, another one of the groups that we're working with, they're absolutely fucking obsessed with race and gender and transgender, and they've bought into it 110%, and that's always their concern. I mean, if a meeting's convened that has majority, this is in Australia, by the way, has a majority of white people at the meeting, there's almost panic. As in absolute panic. Where's the nearest tall building? They're in such a fucking state over this. More the women than the men. So no, we've got no black lesbian here in the room in the meeting. And because they're so obsessed with this madness, this utter madness. Just do the fucking job, you morons. But no, they can't do it. The ideology is all important and must come first, must come second, must come third, must come fourth, and maybe somewhere 99th on the priority agenda is getting the proper business commercial outcome. Because of that, these better qualified people, again in theory better qualified, they achieve less, and they are less successful than the underqualified people who are very committed, again for the reasons I mentioned. And we can draw again this parallel with the bodies politic in the West of 50 years ago that had maybe much less educated people, but people of much more practical, worldly experience. They weren't going straight from high school into politics. They had a life outside of politics where they'd personally achieved various things. Now, maybe there was achievements of a union organizer or something, but it doesn't matter. They still had a life outside of politics. Whereas you look at the proportion of politicians today who've gone from high school, political economy at some bullshit fucking university, then they become a staffer in the office of some politician, and then they're gifted an electoral district for the House of Representatives. Following that, they've never had a job in their lives. So the people back then were very committed to the citizenry and making their lives better, and they also had a practical life experience. They knew what it was like to worry about putting food on the table for their families and paying the electricity bill and these sorts of things. Unlike the politicians today that are obsessed with ideology and obsessed with race, gender ideology, but also have never had any life experience. But it really sort of brought it home to me just watching these in my view, unqualified, inept people. They were just trying so hard to succeed that again, in spite of their inadequacies, they managed to fall over the line, whereas this other outfit, far better qualified in theory, but because they were so obsessed with ideology, they actually didn't achieve as much as the other guys. Just my view. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.